Mike Perry and Jake Paul, I was just talking to Tim Welsh, and Tim Welsh, longtime friend and teammate, head coach, Sugar Sean O'Malley. So I assume you guys know who Tim is, former UFC fighter and all these different things himself. But when a guy is a coach of a world champion, it automatically puts his knowledge and the way he sees things, the X's and O's, it puts him into a different category for credibility. Can we agree? He's earned the right to his opinion to give a breakdown. Oh, by the way, that's the job that he's in, and he's done it so well, he won the world. So I really like getting Tim discussion going, Jake Paul, Mike Perry. When I look at that, it's not fully possible for me to still dismiss what we know to be true, which is Jake Paul is awesome. Jake Paul is a threat. I cannot fully dismiss the idea that he was a Disney character or that he knocked out an NBA player and he's calling out a YouTube star in KSI. Like, while all of those things are true, he is a straight up badass. But I can't fully accept it. And no matter his badassdom compared to Mike Perry's badassism, there's no way that a reasonable person can believe those are true. There's no way that the Disney YouTube international star who is rich to start with could dig down and work hard enough in a sport of boxing to be as big of a badass as Mike Perry. Like, that can't be true, right? But I also can't fully dismiss the notion. Can you? Because that same YouTube star, non-badass, fought Anderson Silva. And he signed and tried to fight Mike Tyson. If you try to fight Mike Tyson in boxing ever in your life, you qualify as a badass. Like, there's possibly not another standard that could be met. Challenging Mike Tyson, doesn't count. Probably moves just somewhere over there, but that could just put you in the category of jerk. That could put you in the category of loudmouth. Are you serious? Are you serious? We'd only know if you're serious. Are you really being serious? You really fight him? How serious are you? Would you show up? Would you put your name on it? Would you put your signature on a contract and try to do it? If you got out of having to do it, and oh man, you knew that was a bad idea anyway, would you do everything you could to preserve the date for one with a different opponent and rebook the fight with Mike Tyson? Would you do those things? Well, no, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. In all fairness, there's only one guy that ever has. There's only one guy. It wasn't George Foreman. It wasn't Canelo Alvarez. There's only one guy who has ever had a date scheduled with Tyson and did everything they could do to preserve that fight, offered to redo it at any time. Oh, and by the way, fight anyone else that you can provide just to keep that date. And any of you who raise your hand and go, I'd have done it, or going, I know a guy that would have done it. Okay, let me just go one step further, just to make sure that we understand. It's just Jake. We just got to give him the nod. Let me just go one step further, okay? It doesn't pay. You trying to preserve that date, you trying to get that same date because you have rent to pay and you've got to go out and fight with somebody. And what the hell is better than foreclosure? I do understand. And it still wouldn't be very many people, but the people that said they would do it or they knew someone that would, like, that was a part of it, wasn't it? What if it was for no money? Because it essentially is for Jake. It really is. Like, Jake's life does not change after he gets the paycheck from Mike Perry. Can we agree? Can we agree that there's not a vehicle that he wants and he's not going to go get it unless he has Perry and then he's going to go out and splurge? Can we agree that there's not a vacation that he's telling the girlfriend, I'm going to take, but we got to get this one right, honey? Can we agree? Can we agree that it really isn't about the money? In fact, it is not about the money. Can we agree? And while doing all of that and willing to do it, you're trying to get a fight with Mike Tyson that you really genuinely want, really genuinely thought you had. You're even changing your body and starting to gain weight. You want it so bad, but you know you lose it all if you lose this next fight. So you got to pick just the right opponent. But that's not the way it worked, because just the right opponent wasn't available, and just the right opponent is not who got called. The face of bare-knuckle boxing is who got called. And you still said yes. I mean, I want you to look at it from that perspective. And I'll tell you what I wish wanted to happen. There was a sparring session between these two, between Mike Perry and Jake Paul, and it happened in Florida. It happened at Paul's gym, and everything was fine. They were chumming the gang, and Paul's kind of getting introduced, and there's the only guys that knew, like, hey man, this guy's not just a caricature, was the guys in the gym. The guys that actually saw him, saw his work ethic, saw how he trained, saw, hey, this guy's kind of a natural with the cardio. The guys that got in there and sparred with him, they're the only ones that knew. I just described 10 people. Nobody had a boxing gym. Nobody getting in the ring sparring. I really just described very few people, and those very few people at that time, because of the belief and or stigma of Jake, were not going to go out and tell the world what they found. Tell the world about their sparring session and their experience. It's just not how it worked. When I tell you that, I wish this was one that would have come up. I've heard sparring stories from the past, and I love them. I happened to be there for Tim Sylvia versus Randy Couture. Like, when that fight was coming up, I had found out the hospital the UFC was going to use so that I could send flowers to Randy before the fight. I knew he was going to be in the hospital, 44 years old and going up to heavyweight, and he's against the Giant. And I saw him versus the Giant. I saw it day after day after day. As a matter of fact, Randy won. So why was I so sure that Tim, right? Why if Randy beat him in practice, am I telling you? Well, Tim let him. I saw it. Tim let him win. Tim was staying at his house. It was respectful. Tim was the new guy. Tim let him. I watched it. I watched when something where Tim would back down. Now, I'm sharing that with you because isn't that interesting what I just told you? You probably enjoyed that story, didn't you? Probably wish this whole day, what else did you see, Chael? How many times did you see him go? It's pretty interesting. We were in a room. It was the Giant, right? Tim said, Randy Couture, myself, Evan Tanner, Phil Baroni. In fact, those two got in a fight, and Randy had to stop going with Tim to break up that fight. Matt Lindland, Chris Lehman, that was the whole room. You'd probably really like me to tell you more about that, wouldn't you? Well, I generally am the same way. But these two had a sparring session that wasn't a walk in the park for Perry. And that part of it, I don't find to be helpful. Like if Perry came in and you remember when Garbrandt and Dillashaw sparred together? But then they had former teammates that were speaking up and say, hey, TJ's telling the truth. And you had former teammates that, though he's not, Garbrandt's telling the truth. Remember when we just went through this with Chimaev and Strickland? And you had two different opinions? And then finally the head coach had to speak up. Remember that? Remember when we found out that Cyril and Francis were like, it's great stuff, but it's not on this one because Perry, who's never nice to anybody about anything. I mean, he's not always a dick, but I'm just saying he's not nice. Kind of put Jake over. In fact, he kind of took it from a standpoint of, hey, as big as this guy is, he didn't throttle me. I did fine with him. I held my own with him. He was big. I held my own with him. And the reason I found that damaging, like one thing that we know about Jake Paul that none of us would dispute, he's better now than he was back then. We have definitely seen in front of our eyes growth. He is better now than he was when they sparred, is Perry. Because one thing on the Perry story is it turns out Mike Perry's a stone cold badass under certain rule sets. Not necessarily. Mike Perry has really grown and been able to showcase and take over a sport. It really wasn't like that. Now, it doesn't make either one of those true. I'm speaking to you about perception. That perception I just laid out is true, and it is accurate. And I wish that we hadn't heard about the sparring, and I wish that Mike Perry's take on it was not just that I did fine. I can go with him just fine, and I was smaller then, I'm bigger now. That part of it, I do have a hard time compartmentalizing, seeing where does that fit in? What is that piece? And Jake Paul's never weighed in on it. Like whatever happened there, Jake Paul has realized if I come out and tell it, it doesn't help with the fight. So what do you gather from that, guys, right? It's all that we have. It's the best piece of information you could possibly have. Feeling a guy, knowing where you're at, remembering and storing that away, knowing what you did well, what you caught him with, what to look out for. And only one guy's talking about it, and the other guy stayed away from it because it wasn't great for promotion. I'm just asking, where do you factor that in? And when it does come down to Perry versus Paul, like, this is turning into a real must-see event. This is turning into a really interesting thing. And guys, you don't always understand, particularly if you haven't done it. And I don't attempt to condescend. I'm attempting to inform. But when you put the gloves on, you have a sport. When you take the gloves off, and it does not matter what the rules are, when you take off the gloves, you now have a different sport. Think of it like this. If they played basketball, two teams played again basketball. Okay, fine. You take those exact two teams, and you do the same thing, and you got 4 quarters, and 5 goes in, and we're going to have a jump up. Everything's the same, but you're on a football field. You're dribbling at turf. You're dribbling at grass. You're running in grass. It's different. It just is. You're now doing something different. And for you combat people, think of jiu-jitsu, okay? But now think of no-gi jiu-jitsu. It's literally the same rules, but it's different results. Why? Because it's a different sport. You change one thing, you change the sport. So you put the gloves on versus you took the gloves off. You're not doing the same thing. I know it feels like it is. I know it sounds like it is, but it's not. So the question is, can the king of bare knuckle do a different sport better than a guy that consistently does this very sport? Simple question, but it's a lot to think about.